nationally slowed down production from the most carbon-rich tar sands projects and reduced absolute CO2 levels from bitumen production. This was the main purpose of my tar sands key geologic risks and opportunities paper. This peer-reviewed paper was published in the September 2008 issue of the Leading Edge. The Leading Edge is the monthly technical journal of the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. As mentioned, SEG has a worldwide membership of 30,000, and many people have read this paper. Copies of my paper are available on the display table. The bottom line is to drill more quality exploration and development prospects in the basin to prove additional light gravity oil and natural gas reserves. This will initiate a necessary interim energy transition period for petroleum supplies with reduced carbon footprints. This is an early graph of cumulative Western Canada conventional oil reserves, production, and consumption, showing 3 distinct discovery and development periods. The first period is represented by the Turner Valley era discoveries, the early flat portion of the graph. The second period is the bonanza of major field discoveries, shown by the steep slope. This steep slope began with the 1947 discovery of the Lachute and Redwater D3 Reef oil fields, followed by the giant Pembina field oil discovery and the Cardium sandstone. Pembina was followed on the steep slope by the giant Swan Hills Reef discoveries. In addition to these classic discoveries, many small to medium-sized fields and pools were also discovered. The more isolated Rainbow Lake and Nisku Pinnacle Reef discoveries occurred on the flattened portion of the curve and began the longer third period of harder to find but still profitable fields and pools. The blue area on the graph shows when Canada was a net importer of crude oil. The realistic projections. These realistic projections were based on the U.S. Great Plains Petroleum Reserve and Production Model published in my 1980 paper. Due to similar geologic conditions, the API all-gravity distribution in our basin, shown earlier, is similar to conventional oil production in this U.S. Great Plains Petroleum Province. The comparable Great Plains development model is defined by the same lazy S-shaped curve that preceded our history in Western Canada by 40 years. They started 40 years ahead of us. We are following that curve. This model is a practical learning curve for us to follow until the year 2040. These curves realistically project current production of 1.5 million barrels of oil per day of low-carbon conventional oil in our basin. However, this level of production requires greatly increased exploration and development drilling activity to previous levels. Conventional oil production of 1.5 million barrels of oil per day would satisfy 75% of current Canadian oil demand and replace about 6 billion barrels of high-carbon bitumen and heavy oil over a 30-year period. This would help provide Canada with a necessary transition period of greatly reduced CO2 emissions and lead us into permanent renewable energy supplies. We practice environmental geology because good planets are hard to find. This slide was originally used as a personal reminder, but it has now become universally important and should now read. We must practice environmental geology because good planets are impossible to find. Between 1973-78, I completed several proprietary projects titled Petroleum Management Planning Reports. These reports were helpful to dozens of oil companies planning corporate exploration and development drilling projects. This drilling activity helped discover more conventional oil and natural gas reserves. My 1980 published paper was presented over 30 years ago to a major international oil industry conference in Calgary. It explains why there are still abundant light oil and natural gas reserves to be proven in our basin. Many of these fields, these future supplies, will be found in deeper fields and pools, as was in the case of the previously mentioned Nisku Pinnacle Reef Trend in the West Pembina area below Cardium oil production. There are also bypass zones That is, wells that are drilled where shallower zones are not recognized to be productive. Although many of these fields and pools will be smaller than before, there are probably a few major fields still hiding from us. This is because Mother Nature is often smarter than we are as geologists, geophysicists, engineers, economists, and even corporate lawyers. New conventional oil and gas supplies can be delivered by effective exploration and development drilling activity. This will be based on creative and better use of geology, geophysics, and engineering. Detailed passive seismic methods, now extensively practiced in tar sands projects, can be useful in other ways. Similar geophysical technologies can be applied in exploring and developing new light oil and natural gas reserves in our basin. In summary, I hope to have convinced you tonight of the following three main points. One, the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin can produce much more light oil supplies and at the same time back out future projections of carbon-rich tar sands, bitumen, and heavy oil production. This will reduce absolute amounts of CO2 emissions from selected projects. Two, new conventional oil and natural gas supplies will help carry us through a necessary transition period of reduced Alberta carbon footprints. This will lead us into a new era of sustainable and economic sources of solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, tidal, and appropriate biomass energy supplies for future generations. And three, there are no good reasons to build a nuclear power plant on or near the Peace River Arch or anywhere else in Alberta. Finally, producing lower carbon energy supplies plus effective changes in our own personal and professional consumption habits can help lead us to healthier and more prosperous lives in Alberta and Canada.